I sat at the end of the table, hands folded over a napkin I hadn't used, as laughter ricocheted around me like glass about to shatter. The turkey was dry, the stuffing was lukewarm, and the chair they gave me wobbled. "We already fed you once today," my sister said. Her voice sugar-dipped and serrated. "Once, after everything, after trusting her with my will, after giving her my signature, after shrinking myself small enough to fit into her life, I asked for one more slice, and she told me I'd had enough. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." The house wasn't meant for this many people. A narrow dining room with low ceilings, chairs jammed elbow to elbow, and the scent of stuffing, cranberry sauce, and clove-heavy sweet potatoes clogging the air. Every voice was slightly too loud, every laugh a little forced, and no one looked directly at Maggie. She sat at the far end of the table, between the coat rack and the drafty window, a paper napkin crumpled in her lap, hands folded neatly. The good plates were out, the kind with the faded gold rim Jenna only used twice a year, Easter and Thanksgiving. Jenna had done her usual: roasted turkey, green bean casserole, 3 kinds of pie. Maggie had brought a bottle of cheap Pinot from the gas station and a tin of biscuits she'd baked that morning. They'd gone untouched. No one spoke to her unless they had to. From the other end of the table, Jenna's voice carried like a knife through icing. "Can someone pass the gravy?" she said, eyes never leaving the carving knife in Ray's hand. Ray, stoic, slow, methodical, kept slicing the turkey breast into perfectly even strips, setting each piece on the platter like it mattered. His wedding ring glinted once in the overhead light. He didn't look at anyone, especially not Maggie. Ava, 16 and prickly, thumbed through her phone under the table. She had Maggie's nose, and her silence. Maggie kept her gaze on her plate. She'd taken just enough to be polite. A few green beans, a scoop of potatoes, a slice of dry breast meat. She hadn't asked for more, until now. "Is there any more turkey left?" she asked softly, not looking up. Just enough volume to be heard by whoever was listening. Jenna froze mid-reach for the gravy boat. The room didn't go silent. It just shifted. Breaths shortened. Forks paused. A flicker of something passed between Nora and her husband, seated 2 chairs away. Even the dog under the table seemed to feel it. Jenna turned her head slowly. Her smile was small and brittle, eyes too bright. "We already fed you once today." The words landed like a slap. Ava's head jerked up. Ray didn't flinch. He just kept carving, the scrape of the knife against the platter deafening now. Maggie didn't blink. She reached for her fork, brought one last piece of turkey to her mouth, chewed it slowly, swallowed. Then she set the fork down. Not dropped, not flung, placed, deliberately, precisely. Metal against ceramic. A sound as small as it was final. She didn't look at anyone, just folded her hands again in her lap and stared forward, eyes unfocused, like she was watching something far beyond the peeling paint on the dining room wall. Across the table, Ava's expression had gone from curiosity to alarm. Her phone slipped quietly onto her thigh. Ray finally spoke. "You want me to cut the leg?" But Jenna didn't answer. She was still watching Maggie, more a threat assessment than concern. A vibration buzzed against Maggie's hip. She shifted in her chair, pulled her phone half out of her pocket to glance at the screen. Nora, the sister who lived next door but hadn't spoken all night. One text. "You okay?" Maggie stared at it. Her thumb hovered. She didn't reply. Instead, she looked up and finally locked eyes with Jenna. Jenna's smile was gone, and Maggie, lips barely moving, whispered something only Jenna could hear. The fork clattered again as someone knocked a glass over, but no one moved. Maggie didn't stay for pie. By the time the whipped cream hit the table, she'd already slipped out the back door, coat zipped to her chin, heels crunching along the frostbitten walkway between her sister's house and her own. She moved like a ghost, no door slam, no goodbyes, just the porch light blinking behind her like a failing pulse. She didn't cry, not once. Not even when she got inside and smelled the faint, familiar scent of cinnamon air freshener clinging to the quiet. Her home was dim and cold. She didn't bother with the heat. The silence suited her. straight to the hallway closet. She yanked open the door, pulled out the folding chair from behind the vacuum cleaner, and opened it in the middle of the living room. Climbing onto it in her wool skirt and heels, she reached for the top shelf, far back, where she'd shoved the things she never wanted to look at again. Her fingertips hit cardboard. She dragged the box down. Dust bloomed into the air. She coughed once and flipped the lid open. Inside, neatly filed documents in color-coded folders. Jenna's handwriting on every label. M. Legal. Wills. POA. Advance care. Do not toss. Maggie sank onto the couch with the box in her lap, flipping open the folder marked Last Will and Testament. The pages were crisp, too crisp, like they'd been handled just enough to stay valid, but not enough to feel human. She scanned the print. Executor. Jenna Lynn Fairbanks. Medical proxy. Jenna Lynn Fairbanks. Sole beneficiary. Jenna Lynn Fairbanks. It was all there, plain as glass. Every piece of her future had been written under Jenna's thumb. Signed years ago during some flu season, when Ray was still pretending to care, and Ava still thought her aunt was just tired, not something broken they couldn't name. Back. Then, Jenna had offered help with a smile and a folder. I'm the practical one, Mags. Let me take care of it. It's just paperwork. Maggie sat very still, then reached for a red pen from the drawer. She pressed hard, circling Jenna's name once, twice, 3 times, leaving no doubt. The ink bled slightly at the edges. Good, let it bleed. Then she grabbed a fresh manila folder and wrote in thick capital letters, Revision, immediate. Page by page, she laid the old documents inside, as if preparing evidence. It felt like something holy, something final. The last thing she added was a note in her own hand. To be redrafted Monday. Contact Harlan directly. She tapped her phone screen. The glare lit her face. A swipe, a few quick taps. Harlan C. DeWitt, estate planning. 2 rings. Then a woman's voice, crisp and warm, like a receptionist, who knew just how fragile things could be. Hello, this is Leslie at DeWitt Law. This is Maggie Fairbanks. I need to update my will. As soon as possible. After the holiday. Yes, of course, Miss Fairbanks. I see we still have you on file. How's Monday at 9? Perfect. I'll be there. She ended the call. Let the silence return. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then her front door opened without a knock. Nora stepped in, balancing 2 dessert-laden paper plates and shrugging off her coat like she lived there. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, and she looked every bit like someone who'd been biting her tongue for too long. I brought pie, she announced. Pumpkin and pecan. Jenna said you forgot to take any. I said she was full of it. Maggie didn't look up from the folder. Was I missed? You were the best part of the room. Nora dropped the plates onto the coffee table. It's a low bar. She flopped onto the couch beside Maggie, her shoulder brushing Maggie's in quiet solidarity. What are we looking at? She asked. Maggie handed her the will. Nora scanned the page and whistled. Damn, still has Jenna listed for everything? For now. Nora raised an eyebrow. And soon. Not for much longer. They sat with that for a moment. The fridge hummed. A clock ticked faintly somewhere behind them. She's lucky, Nora said finally, that you didn't throw a dinner roll at her skull. Maggie smiled, small, dry. I thought about it. I thought about doing it for you. A text buzzed. Maggie glanced at the phone on the cushion beside her. Her smile vanished. Jenna, we need to talk. Now. She locked the screen, paused, then whispered, more to herself than to Nora. She knows. The apology came at 9:07 the next morning, not from Jenna, from Ava. Maggie was in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to whistle, when her phone buzzed against the counter. A single text, no emojis, no punctuation. Sorry about yesterday. Maggie stared at the screen, brow furrowed. She read it twice, 3 times, then typed back. You don't owe me an apology for her behavior. The dots appeared instantly, disappeared, reappeared. Can I come over later this week? Just me. Maggie didn't answer right away. She poured the hot water over the Earl Grey bag and carried the mug to the dining table. The morning light came in sideways through the blinds, slicing the room into soft gold and dust. The house was too quiet again. But this time it felt less like loneliness and more like pause. A breath before something shifted. By the time she sat down, the dots were still there. Ava typing, deleting, starting again. Maggie replied, "Thursday, after school. I'll have tea ready." She spent that morning pulling out the photo boxes from the basement. 3 of them, all labeled by year. She hadn't touched them in ages. One had water damage. Another had mouse bites along the corner. But the third was intact. She wiped it down and carried it upstairs, setting it on the coffee table like it was something sacred. When Thursday came, Ava arrived exactly at 4:15. No knock, just one quiet tap and a push. Maggie had left the door unlocked. The girl looked older in daylight. Less eyeliner, hair in a bun, earbuds tucked in the front pocket of her hoodie. "Hey," she said, stepping inside. "Hi, sweetheart." Maggie didn't hug her, didn't offer, but Ava stood there for a second longer than necessary, like she might have wanted one and didn't know how to ask. Maggie gestured to the couch. "Tea's ready. Pick your poison, blackcurrant or sleepy time." Ava cracked the smallest smile. Sleepy time feels like a trap. Smart girl. Maggie poured the blackcurrant into a chipped mug with a lighthouse on it and handed it over. "Sugar?" "Half a spoon." They sat in the living room, knees not quite touching, sipping quietly. Outside, the wind was picking up. Leaves scraped across the porch like little feet. "So," Ava said, nodding toward the photo box. "What's this?" "History," Ava raised an eyebrow. "The revisionist kind or the real deal?" Maggie smiled. "Depends who's asking." Ava leaned forward and flipped the lid off the box. Inside, snapshots, Polaroids, negatives still in their sleeves. Summers at Lake George, birthday cakes, a Halloween where Jenna wore a Raggedy Ann costume and Maggie was a pirate with a patch over the wrong eye. Ava picked up one of Ray holding baby Ava in the hospital. Jenna was in the background, exhausted, but still somehow looking like she'd just stepped out of a catalog. "She's always had that face," Ava muttered, "like she's holding it together for the rest of us." "She was tired," Maggie said softly, "and terrified." "She's still terrifying." Maggie didn't argue. "She has this tone," Ava said, flipping to another photo. "Like even when she's saying something nice, it feels like a warning." Maggie watched her closely. "You ever told her?" "That?" Ava snorted. "You kidding? She'd tell me I was being sensitive, or hormonal, or dramatic." Maggie sipped her tea. "That's her problem, not yours." Ava looked at her, and something in her face cracked open just a little. "She micromanages everything," she said. "Even compassion." There it was. Clean, sharp, real. Maggie nodded slowly. "That won't affect you going forward." Ava blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're old enough now to start choosing who you want to be close to, and who gets access to your thoughts, your time, your heart." They sat in silence. A new one. Not awkward, but warm. Ava leaned back against the couch, her head tilted slightly toward Maggie, like she was recalibrating everything she thought she knew about this woman. Maggie reached for another photo and handed it to her. A blurry one of Maggie, maybe in her 20s, dancing barefoot on a beach, hair wild in the wind. "You look free," Ava said. "I was, for about 5 minutes," Maggie replied, smiling. Ava reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out her phone. "Do you mind if I take a few pictures of these? Just for me?" "Go ahead." As she began snapping photos of the old prints, Maggie's phone buzzed once more. She glanced down. "Jenna, I'm coming over." Monday morning, the sky hung low and gunmetal gray, promising rain that hadn't yet arrived. Maggie parked in front of the old brick building on Haverhill Street at 8:56 a.m. The sign above the door still read, "DeWitt and Kellerman, LLP," though Kellerman had retired a decade ago. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment, watching a leaf spin helplessly across the windshield before vanishing over the hood. Then she exhaled, unbuckled, and stepped into the cold. No hesitation, no second thoughts. She locked the car with a beep that echoed off the wet concrete. Inside, the warmth hit instantly. Wood-paneled walls, the faint scent of leather, and a receptionist with a voice that could smooth stone. "Good morning, Miss Fairbanks," Leslie said, standing from behind the desk. "Harlan's expecting you. Conference room B." Maggie nodded, her coat still damp at the shoulders, and walked the familiar hallway. A dozen meetings had taken place here over the years, wills updated, deeds notarized. Boring stuff when Ray still thought signing papers was romantic. Today was different. Harlan was already seated when she entered, reading glasses low on his nose, a steaming mug of something in his hand. He stood when he saw her, offering a warm smile. "Maggie, you look well." "I look tired." "Then tired suits you." She sat across from him, the file already in her hands. The new manila folder, revision, immediate, landed between them with a soft slap. "I want her name off everything." Harlan removed his glasses and leaned back. "All right, we'll take this one piece at a time. Jenna's your executor, power of attorney, and primary, ARD. Beneficiary? You're sure you want to strip all three?" "Every trace." His brow lifted slightly. "Not even as a backup, or a limited clause. Not even a sentence." He studied her for a long moment. "I have to ask, would you like to leave her anything at all?" Maggie's lips barely moved. "She has enough. Of mine, of hers, of what she takes without asking." Harlan nodded and pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. "Then let's begin." They worked in silence for a while. The scratch of his pen was the only sound, steady and decisive. Maggie watched as he rewrote her life in real time, line by line. When they reached the heir section, he paused. "And who would you like to name for personal effects? Sentimental items?" She didn't hesitate. "Ava." He looked up. "Your niece?" "She'll want the books, the recipes, family keepsakes, photographs. Things that matter to someone who still has room to care." He nodded and jotted it down. "And the rest? Financial assets, retirement, investments, proceeds from the house?" Maggie reached into her bag and slid a folded brochure across the table. The corners were creased from too much handling. "The Renner Foundation for Women's Health and Medicine." Harlan scanned it, then whistled low. "A full endowment?" "As much as it'll stretch." His voice softened. "That's generous. It's overdue." By the time they finished, nearly 2 hours had passed. Maggie signed each document with calm, exact strokes, as if rewriting a script she'd finally memorized. When the final page was signed, she leaned back in the chair, hands loose in her lap. "How long until it's finalized?" she asked. "I'll file it this week," Harlan replied, slipping the pages into a binder. "Barring delays, it'll be ironclad within 10 business days." She nodded. As she rose, he added, "You know she might contest it. She can try." He didn't press further. At the door, he paused. "You didn't come in here angry, no?" "Most people do." Maggie turned and looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Anger's useful, but it's not the point." He nodded like he understood. She doubted he did, but that was all right. Outside, the rain had started, just a fine mist. She pulled her coat tight and crossed the parking lot slowly, stepping around puddles with deliberate care. When she reached her car, her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket. "Unknown. Number, you made a mistake. No name, no signature, just the warning." She stared at the screen, a chill blooming in her gut. Not fear exactly, more like recognition, like a bell that had finally stopped echoing and left silence in its wake. Then another buzz. "Unknown number. I'm not done." The next morning, Maggie dressed with intention. Navy slacks, a soft charcoal sweater, and her grandmother's locket tucked beneath the neckline. She didn't do jewelry anymore, not really, but today felt different, like something old needed witnessing. By 10:03, she was sitting across from Lisa Chambers, her longtime financial advisor, inside a glass-walled office with filtered sunlight and minimalist furniture. Lisa, sharp-eyed and warm-voiced, had always struck Maggie as the kind of woman who could hold your hand while gutting a portfolio to the studs. The moment she walked in, Lisa gave her a once-over and smiled. "You look different." "Because I am," Maggie said. Lisa motioned to the chair across from her desk. "All right then, what's changed?" Maggie slid the binder onto the desk, the same one Harlan had closed with a quiet snap less than 24 hours ago. She flipped it open to the key pages. Lisa's eyes scanned the legal language, pausing on the line where Jenna's name used to be. Her brow lifted. "Well, this is new." Maggie didn't blink. "It's permanent." Lisa read a bit more, her fingers tapping the side of the page. "Executors gone, POA reassigned. Beneficiary list, completely updated. And this, She tapped the foundation line. That's a hell of a legacy. It's meant to be. Lisa sat back, her eyes thoughtful now. Do you want your financial structures to match the legal ones? Because right now, some of your accounts, particularly that Merrill one, still name Jenna as a co-signer. I want her out of every place she can reach. Then let's clean it up, Lisa said simply. They spent the next hour combing through each account. Savings, investments, CDs with ridiculous maturity dates. The old joint emergency account that Jenna had insisted on setting up just in case something happened after Ray left. That was the first one Maggie closed. Lisa didn't rush the process. This transfer will consolidate everything into a living trust under your sole control, she explained. You'll name a successor trustee, obviously. Ava? Maggie nodded. She's still young, but she'll grow into it. Lisa smiled. Smart. Sentimental heirs can learn to be practical. Once the documents were printed, Maggie signed with slow, deliberate strokes. No flourish, just finality. Lisa checked each page, then passed her a confirmation slip. That's it. The trust is live. The funds are secure. No one but you can touch this now. Maggie folded the slip in half and tucked it into her purse. That's the point, Lisa stood. You know she'll notice. She already has. She might push back. Maggie raised her eyes, calm, steel gray, unmoved. She can claw at the door all she wants. There's nothing left on my side. Lisa nodded, not saying anything more. There was something close to admiration in her expression, but not pity, not anymore. As Maggie rose to leave, Lisa placed a hand gently on her arm. You're doing this the right way, Maggie. Quiet power, clean lines. No drama, Maggie said, half smiling. No debris, Lisa corrected. Back in the parking lot, Maggie sat in her car with the engine off. The clouds were heavy again, pressing low over the street like a sky waiting to break. She didn't mind the gray anymore. It gave her cover, space to move without casting a shadow. She pulled out her phone, more habit than curiosity. A new voicemail, no caller ID, timestamp. 27 minutes ago, she hit play, no greeting, just Jenna's voice. Measured, cold, quieter than Maggie remembered. You think you've untied yourself, but you haven't. Some knots you don't get to cut. Some knots, a breath, a pause. They tighten when you pull away. Maggie sat very still. The message ended in silence. She didn't replay it, didn't delete it either. Instead, she pulled the keys from the ignition, walked back inside the financial office building, and sat quietly in the lobby for several long minutes, watching people move, chatting into phones, flipping through paperwork. Then she took out her notepad and wrote one name at the top of a blank page, Jenna. Beneath it, she drew a line, and underneath that she wrote, Documented history to begin. Ray's message came 2 days after Jenna's voicemail, a single sentence sent from a number Maggie hadn't seen on her screen in nearly a year. No subject line, no punctuation. If you want to talk, I'm here. She stared at it, while the kettle whined softly behind her. She didn't feel angry, not even surprised. The message felt like dust, like something shaken loose from the back of an old drawer, half-hearted, conveniently timed, and 2 decades too late. She didn't answer, didn't think about answering. She just held the phone in one hand, opened her contacts list with the other, scrolled until his name appeared, Ray, Ava's dad, and pressed delete. A small box popped up. Are you sure you want to delete this contact? She tapped yes with her thumb. Then she went back to her tea. Later that afternoon, Nora let herself in through the side door, holding a manila folder and a stubborn expression. I brought the big girl paper, she said, kicking off her boots. Not the flimsy printer kind, the kind that says, I will escalate this if I have to. Maggie was already at the dining table, laptop open, envelopes laid out like a game of solitaire. They worked in silence for a while. The only sounds were the shuffle of paper, the click of keys, and the occasional creak of the radiator in the corner. Nora printed out 2 identical letters. The headers were plain. The language was precise. Do not contact. This notice serves as formal written instruction that all communication, direct or indirect, must cease immediately. Below that, just Maggie's name. And the mailing address. No apology, no warmth. Just boundaries printed in 12-point font and plain English. Maggie read each one aloud before signing them. She folded them cleanly, sealed them into envelopes, and slipped the return receipt slips into place. Nora watched her carefully. "You sure about this?" "I am." "No hesitation?" "They gave me their boundaries," Maggie said, sliding the envelopes across the table like poker chips. "I'm just returning the favor." Nora leaned back, a quiet smile forming. "That's how you say enough in ink." At the post office. The clerk didn't blink when Maggie requested certified mail with return receipts. He slid the forms forward like it was routine, because it was. Because Maggie wasn't the first woman to walk into that post office needing a paper trail. Still, something shifted when she saw him place the green stickers on the back of each envelope. The weight of them suddenly felt heavier, not because she doubted it, but because it was real now, final. As she signed the forms, she felt Nora's hand settle briefly at the center of her back. Not for reassurance, not for comfort, just presence. They left without speaking. That night, Maggie sat in her living room with a pen and the same notepad she'd used after the voicemail. She turned past the page where Jenna's name sat in bold, underlined ink. She found the next blank page and wrote, "Ray." Underneath it, she listed 5 bullet points. Small things, incidents, a voicemail he never returned. A birthday card Ava opened by herself at age 7, the day he came to pick up his tools and didn't look her in the eye. She wasn't writing it for revenge. She was writing it because history, when left undocumented, has a way of being rewritten by the wrong people. She paused halfway down the page, then added a 6th bullet. "I'm here," he said, when I didn't ask him to be. She closed the notebook and placed it gently in her drawer. Then she turned off every light in the house except the porch lamp, which she dimmed to its lowest setting. The quiet wasn't eerie anymore. It was earned. As she climbed into bed, her phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't from Ray or Jenna. It was Ava. "Can I ask you something important?" Maggie typed back. "Always." There was a pause, then a longer one. Finally, Ava's message came through, worded carefully. "If I ever decide I don't want to live with her anymore, would you be okay with that?" Maggie stared at the screen, heart tightening, lungs forgetting their rhythm for a beat. She typed, deleted, typed again. And then she sent, "Whatever door she closes, I'll open one wider." The storm broke on a Wednesday. Maggie woke to the sound of her phone buzzing across the nightstand. Once, then again. She rolled over, blinking through the gray morning light. The screen was full of missed calls and 3 unread texts from Jenna. Each one colder than the last. Jenna. "What did you say to her, Jenna?" "Ava's being impossible, Jenna. You've started something you can't control." Maggie exhaled through her nose, set the phone face down, and reached for her glasses. The silence that followed was heavy, almost theatrical, as if the house itself was waiting for her next move. She didn't reply, not to the calls, not to the texts. She made coffee instead, 2 scoops, splash of half and half, no sugar, and sat at the table by the window as the first drops of rain began to streak down the glass. Somewhere across town, she could imagine Jenna, pacing, demanding explanations, framing herself as the aggrieved one. Maggie took a slow sip, tasting calm. By noon, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Jenna. It was Ava. A single message, short and surgical. "She asked what you said to me. I told her the truth." Maggie's fingers hovered over the screen. Before she could type a reply, another bubble appeared. "I said you didn't say anything. She did." Maggie felt something unclench deep inside her chest. A knot she hadn't realized was still there. She typed back, "You didn't have to defend me. Ava, I wasn't defending you. I was correcting her." For a long time after that, Maggie sat without moving. The rain outside softened to mist. Her reflection in the window looked older, yes, but lighter too, like she'd stepped out from under something invisible and endless. 2 days later, she had her annual appointment with Dr. Keller. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon polish. A wall-mounted TV played a muted morning show, anchors smiling too widely over footage of storms in another state. When her name was called, she followed the nurse down the hallway, the soles of her shoes whispering across the linoleum. Dr. Keller looked up from her tablet when Maggie entered. "Morning, Maggie. How have you been?" "Better now than I've ever been," Maggie said simply. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't even optimism. It was truth, spoken plainly, without apology. The doctor smiled. "I like the sound of that. I just need to verify your emergency contacts and proxy information. Should be the same as last year." Maggie shook her head. "Not anymore." She reached into her bag and handed over a typed sheet, freshly printed, with Ava's name listed clearly as her new healthcare proxy. "No Jenna Fairbanks?" Keller asked, scanning the form. "No Jenna Fairbanks." "All right," the doctor said, tapping the tablet to update the record. "You're officially your own guardian again. That's a good thing, Maggie." Maggie smiled faintly. "It's overdue." When she left the clinic, she stood for a moment under the awning, watching the drizzle collect in the gutter. The air smelled like rain-soaked earth and the faint sweetness of wet asphalt. She let it wash over her, the relief, the clarity, the simplicity of final paperwork. This wasn't revenge, it was restoration. The following week, on a quiet Sunday morning, Maggie heard the front door open. No knock, just the squeak of old hinges and soft footsteps on the tile. She turned from the sink. Ava stood there, a reusable grocery bag slung over one shoulder, her hair damp from the fog. "I brought some things," Ava said. "Milk, bread, those cinnamon rolls you like." Maggie blinked. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." Ava moved past her, setting the bag on the counter, unpacking with methodical ease. Apples, tea, a small bouquet of daisies, awkwardly. Wrapped in butcher paper. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Ava filled the kettle. Maggie found 2 mugs. The rhythm felt natural, like something they'd been practicing without knowing it. When they finally sat down, Ava tore the plastic wrap from the daisies and set them in an old glass jar. "She asked if I was coming here today," she said quietly. "I told her I didn't need permission." Maggie's lips curved, just barely. "That's my girl." For a while, they drank tea in silence. The house was still, but not empty. Maggie felt its pulse again, warm, alive, like it remembered how to hold more than one person at a time. Outside, the fog began to lift. Sunlight pushed through, slow but certain. Ava glanced toward the window, then back at her aunt. "What happens now?" Maggie reached over and covered her hand. "Now," she said softly, "we wait and see who blinks first." At that, Ava smiled, small, conspiratorial, and Maggie realized the war Jenna thought she was still winning had already shifted fronts. Because sometimes the loudest defiance isn't noise, it's peace. Jenna showed up on a Thursday, unannounced, uninvited, unmistakable. Maggie spotted her from the kitchen window just after 10 a.m., a sliver of motion behind the frost-blurred glass, then a shadow crossing the porch. The sound of cautious, deliberate steps. No knock, no doorbell. Just the weight of Jenna's presence, coiled behind a pane of oak and glass. She didn't carry anything, no peace offering, no grocery bag, not even her phone, just her purse slung tightly under her arm like armor, and her jaw set in a way Maggie hadn't seen since the week their mother died. Jenna stood on the porch for 5 full minutes. Maggie watched the clock. She didn't flinch, didn't move, just wrapped her hands around her tea mug and let the steam cloud her glasses. She didn't blink. The longer Jenna waited, the smaller she looked. Not physically, not visibly, but something in her stance, shoulders pulled tight, feet shifting with imperceptible unease, looked different now, like she'd miscalculated the weight of her own gravity. Maggie didn't open the door, didn't open herself either, she just watched. And when Jenna finally turned and walked back down the steps, Maggie exhaled quietly, like someone easing into warm water after a long day. That afternoon, Nora dropped by with 2 paper bags of pantry items and the latest gossip from the church bulletin board. She barely had one boot off before she said, "So, heard Jenna tried the whole Ghost of Christmas Past routine." "She didn't haunt long," Maggie said, setting the bags on the counter. Nora popped a grape in her mouth. "Still think you should have thrown that dinner roll," Maggie smirked. "Now I just want her to understand it was never about the food." Nora arched a brow. "No? It's about respect," Maggie said flatly. "She came here like it was still her stage, like I owed her a scene. I just didn't give her the audience." Nora whistled low. "Oof. Savage." Quietly. It's the best way, Maggie said, reaching under the sink. I need you to help me with something. By nightfall, the garage keypad was reprogrammed. The old code, the one Jenna insisted on memorizing just in case there's ever an emergency, Mags, was gone. New batteries in the keypad, new lock on the side gate. Maggie even updated the mobile app for her security system. Notifications turned on, camera angles adjusted, front and back coverage now, with night vision. Every click felt clean, like scrubbing a chalkboard someone else had written on for years. That evening, Ava arrived just as the sun dropped behind the rooftops, carrying a worn folder and a quiet resolve. She let herself in. Maggie heard the door open but didn't look up. She knew Ava's footsteps now, knew the rhythm of someone entering a house like they belonged there. Ava dropped the folder on the table. It's all here: school, dentist, phone carrier, even my stupid bank. Emergency contact. It's you. Maggie looked at her, surprised. Ava shrugged. You don't have to do anything. I just needed it written somewhere that I have another option. Maggie opened the folder and scanned the forms, each one signed, each one declaring, in some quiet, bureaucratic way, a shift of allegiance. You're sure? Ava nodded. She made it about control. You made it about choice. Maggie reached out and squeezed her niece's hand, her voice low. That's the difference. They sat together for a long time, the sounds of the house filling in around them, furnace ticking, ice shifting in the freezer, a distant neighbor's TV playing some crime drama too loud. Ava spoke again, barely above a whisper. She's going to lose her mind when she realizes she's not the center anymore. She already knows. And Maggie stood, walked to the front window, and drew the curtain just a little. Outside, a car idled half a block down. Lights off, engine humming. She couldn't see who was behind the wheel, didn't need to. She's watching, Ava said. I know. A beat passed. Ava stepped beside her. Do we do anything? Maggie's voice was calm. No, we let her sit with it. Another long pause. Then Ava, softer this time, asked, what if she tries harder? Maggie turned, locking eyes with her. Then we get louder in a different way. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, no postmark. Just a plain white rectangle slipped through the mail slot like a whisper. Hand-delivered. Tucked among grocery flyers and an oil change coupon Maggie didn't need. She spotted it immediately. The paper was thicker, smoother, a little too careful. Her name was written on the front in Jenna's handwriting, precise, upright, and sharp at the edges. Maggie stood in the foyer, coat still, zipped, keys in one hand, mail in the other. She stared at the envelope for maybe 10 seconds, maybe less. Then she walked to the kitchen, set the groceries down, poured herself a mug of coffee, and retrieved the small shredder from beneath the pantry shelf. It made a soft mechanical hum as it came to life. No drama, no protest, just readiness. She held the envelope over the teeth for a moment, watching it flutter slightly in the draft from the vent. A part of her registered the old reflex, the pull to peek, to wonder, to decode Jenna's tone before Jenna got to define it. She resisted. Maggie fed the letter into the machine. The shredder pulled it in with slow hunger, swallowing the envelope whole, edge to edge, sheet by unseen sheet, until all that remained were soft white ribbons curled like shed skin in the bin below. She took a sip of her coffee, no blinking, no flinching. Just the warmth of roasted quiet settling into her chest. Nora arrived an hour later with frozen quiche and a new pair of gloves she had found on sale. She spotted the shredder bin almost instantly. Oh my God, she said, walking straight to it. Tell me that was what I think it was. Maggie didn't look up from the cabinet where she was stacking cans. It was. Nora reached into the bin and lifted a handful of shredded paper like it was confetti. No return address? Nope. Typed or handwritten? Handwritten. Nora let the paper sift through her fingers, slow and deliberate. Better than therapy. Maggie smiled faintly. Cheaper, too. They ate lunch at the kitchen table with the back door open a crack, the late winter air drifting in like a dare. The quiche was too salty, but neither of them said anything. There was something reverent about the silence that followed. Not emptiness, just space. Like the quiet had finally stopped holding its breath. After Nora left, Maggie returned to her office and opened her calendar. The weekend ahead was blank. Just 3 days of uninterrupted time, stretching wide and unclaimed. She typed in a single phrase under Friday evening and dragged it through Sunday night. Quiet weekend. No visitors. Then she closed the laptop and stared at the piano across the hall. It had once belonged to Jenna. They'd grown up with it. A dusty upright with chipped ivory keys and a soundboard that buzzed whenever you hit G sharp. Jenna was the prodigy. Maggie just sat beside her, listening, pretending the chords meant something more than obedience. After their mother died, Jenna insisted it be moved into Maggie's house for safekeeping, but it had always felt like an altar Maggie wasn't allowed to touch. She walked over now and lifted the lid slowly, pressed one key, middle C. It rang out clean but flat, exactly as she remembered. She closed the lid, picked up her phone, dialed the number she'd looked up 2 days earlier. Ridgeview Elementary, the receptionist answered, cheerful and winded. Yes, Maggie said. I have an upright piano I'd like to donate. In good condition, comes with a bench and old sheet music. There was a pause, then a burst of enthusiasm. Oh my God, we would love that. We've been trying to start a music room with almost nothing. Can I get your name? Maggie gave it. Arranged the pickup, hung up. Then she walked back into the office, grabbed a sticky note, and wrote in capital letters, Jenna's piano, pick up Friday, 10 a.m. She stuck it on the piano lid. Not a message, not a memorial, just closure, in Scotch tape. As she turned to leave the room, her phone buzzed on the desk. Another text. Unknown number. No name. You're making a mistake. She stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without reading further. Harlan showed up with the final documents in a black leather case and a faint limp from an old knee injury he refused to have surgery on. The sky outside was overcast, light trying and failing to break through a ceiling of pale clouds. You didn't have to come in person, Maggie said as she opened the door. I owed it to you, he replied. Besides, I don't trust the mail for something like this. She stepped aside and let him in. The house smelled like clove and pine, two scents that didn't naturally go together, but somehow felt clean here. Finished. Like something had been scrubbed down to the bones and remade. They sat at the kitchen table. Harlan placed the case between them and clicked it open with practiced care. I've got your certified copies, original will, updated proxy, medical directive, trust funding letter, and final disbursement clause, he said, sliding each document out one by one. It's all in here, executed, witnessed, and locked. He paused, adjusting his glasses. And as you instructed, no Jenna, no backup clause, no indirect provisions, not even a mention. Maggie nodded, expression unreadable. Good. He reached for the last folder, thinner than the others, and handed it to her. Ava's portion is here. It's modest, as you asked. Quiet. Nothing flashy. She won't need to make a speech or sit on any board. She'd hate that, Maggie said. This is about giving her space to grow, not tying her to my shadow. Harlan smiled. It's thoughtful. No, Maggie said. It's specific. She flipped through the pages with measured calm. The scholarship fund, 90% of her estate, would be transferred to the Renner Foundation in quarterly installments. Conditions locked. Oversight appointed. Ava's portion, a private trust, was structured to release in phases. Rent support, school aid, a modest retirement match. And not a penny of it could be reassigned to a parent. Especially not that parent. Maggie closed the folder. Looks right. You sure you're ready to seal it? I was ready 10 years ago, she said. I just didn't know it yet. Harlan packed the originals back into the leather case, then pulled a slim, fireproof folder from his briefcase and handed it over. Keep this one somewhere secure, preferably somewhere a key won't get found by accident. Maggie stood and walked to the hallway closet. Inside, behind a row of neatly folded blankets, sat a small black safe bolted into the hardwood. She opened it with a code, one that had changed in the last month, and gently laid the folder inside. Not as a threat, as a boundary no one could cross. When she returned to the kitchen, Nora was already there, dropping off a bag of groceries and inspecting Harlan's case like it might bite. Is that the packet? She asked, eyeing it like contraband. It is, Harlan said, with a small nod. Final version. Hot damn, Nora muttered, setting down the bag of apples. You're not vindictive, Maggie. You're just very, very thorough. Maggie poured herself a glass of water. I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in completion. Harlan zipped the case closed and rose slowly, pressing a hand to his hip. Well, he said, you've officially put your affairs in order, ironclad. I don't say that lightly. Maggie walked him to the door. Thank you, Harlan, for treating it like it mattered. It does matter, he said. Legacies are louder than voices. When he left, Nora stood in the middle of the kitchen, hands on her hips, staring at nothing. She's going to find out eventually, she said. She'll try, Maggie replied. And when she does? She'll realize she's not in the book. Nora looked at her. And what happens when someone used to controlling the story finds out they've been written out? Maggie opened the fridge and pulled out a pitcher of sweet tea. Her voice was cool, measured. Then she'll scream into a room where no one's listening. She poured a glass, took a sip. And somewhere across town, the silence had already started to echo. The folding chairs in the library's multi-purpose room creaked when you sat down too fast. Ava did just that, crossed her legs, fidgeted with her pen, and scanned the circle of strangers as if memorizing faces might dull her nerves. Maggie sat beside her, quiet and still, hands resting on a spiral notebook like it was sacred. She'd thought the workshop would be full of aspiring novelists. It wasn't. It was teachers, caregivers, a postal clerk. One woman had just lost her brother and said she was writing it down so it doesn't rot inside. There was no stage, no icebreakers, just a sign taped to the wall. Write what shouldn't be forgotten. The facilitator, a middle-aged man with paint-speckled shoes and a calm, chalky voice, gave one prompt and walked away. Write about something that wasn't offered twice. Maggie didn't hesitate. She bent her head and wrote, Second servings aren't guaranteed by M. Fairbanks. They told me it was grace, the first slice of turkey, the second scoop of potatoes, the attention, the decisions, the vote at the table. But grace wears off if you don't earn it again the next day. So I learned to ask only once, to smile like I didn't notice, to place my fork down quietly instead of slamming it down like my voice would break the porcelain. Some people say you should be grateful for what's given, but I know now, if they don't offer it twice, it was never yours to begin with. When Maggie finished the last word, she didn't read it over, just placed her pen down, spine straight, eyes forward. Ava peeked over, read the piece silently, and blinked 3 times in a row like she wasn't sure what hit her. The facilitator collected pages slowly. He didn't read them aloud, didn't make comments on anyone's handwriting. But when he reached Maggie's, he paused. Who wrote this? He asked, holding it without lifting his eyes. Maggie raised her hand slightly. He nodded once. That was devastatingly sharp. No one said anything for a few beats. Then Ava leaned over and whispered, Damn. Later, after the room had emptied and the folding chairs had been stacked, Maggie stood at the library printer, feeding her flash drive into the old terminal. She printed the piece on cream linen paper, trimmed the edges with a paper cutter, and slid it into a frame she'd brought in her tote. At home, she hung it above her desk, not too high, not to be admired, just eye level, where it couldn't be ignored. Nora came by that night with split pea soup and a 6-pack of ginger beer. She noticed the frame the moment she walked in. You wrote something, she asked, squinting toward the wall. Maggie nodded. Nora walked over and read the piece silently. Halfway through, she sat down. Then she read it again. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. You always were the quiet one, until now. I don't need a voice, Maggie replied, spooning soup into 2 bowls. Just a pen and a record. They ate at the kitchen table with the lights dimmed low, the steam curling upward like punctuation. Maggie felt a stillness inside her, but not the old kind. The one that used to come with being dismissed, erased, maneuvered around. This was a stillness with weight, presence. Later, as Nora was leaving, she paused at the door and turned back. You know she'll read it eventually. Maggie didn't look up from rinsing the bowls. She'll think it's about her, Nora raised her eyebrows. Isn't it? Maggie dried her hands on a towel, turned off the faucet, and finally met Nora's eyes. It's about all the things she mistook for power, and how they were never hers to keep. Nora didn't respond. She didn't need to. Outside, the wind picked up, leaves scattering across the sidewalk. Maggie locked the door behind her, then walked back into the office. She looked up at the frame again, not for reassurance, just for confirmation. And somewhere, at that very same moment, a notification lit up on Ava's phone. A text from Jenna. "You think she's so wise, but she's rewriting everything, and you're letting her." Ava stared at it. Her thumb hovered. Then she did what Maggie had taught her. She didn't reply. It was Ava who saw the post first. She was sitting on Maggie's porch steps in the late afternoon sun, legs tucked under her, phone in hand, scrolling through what she called the digital ruins, the Facebook pages, local moms groups, the kind of posts Jenna swore she didn't read but always seemed to know about. "Here," Ava said, turning the screen toward Maggie without fanfare. "She posted this an hour ago." It was a long caption under a grainy photo of a piano being lifted onto a flatbed truck. The shot was angled from a car window. Jenna must have taken it from down the street, hidden like a tourist at her own sister's life. When people erase you from their lives, they don't do it with fire. They do it with logistics, with signatures and safes and silent drop-offs. And then they call it healing. The likes were few, mostly acquaintances, a few heart emojis, one sad face from an old church friend. Maggie didn't blink. She took the phone gently from Ava, opened her email app, and sent herself screenshots. She didn't comment, didn't message, didn't flinch. Instead, she stood, walked inside, and pulled the fireproof folder from the safe. She added the screenshots to her legal file, titled simply Post Severance, Personal Record, a quiet tab next to estate and medical and security. No rebuttals, no counterpost, just a timestamp and evidence of exactly how far Jenna was willing to stretch her martyrdom to remain visible. Back on the porch, Ava stayed silent, watching a squirrel dig in Maggie's flower bed like it had a vendetta. "She wants people to think you banished her," she said. Maggie closed the folder, locked the safe, and returned to the porch, easing herself onto the bench beside Ava. "She wants people to feel sorry for the role she wrote herself into," Maggie said. "But this isn't theater anymore." Ava leaned against her. "You didn't even say anything back. That's the point." Later that week, Maggie met with Lisa for the last round of confirmations. They sat in Lisa's office with 2 cups of black coffee, and the kind of silence that comes when the heavy lifting is done, and what's left is just the inspection of clean edges. "All right," Lisa said, tapping through her dual monitors. "Everything is finalized. Beneficiaries confirmed. No external access. Redundancies in place. Only you and your trustee can move anything." "No noise?" Maggie asked. Lisa smiled. "No noise, just structure." They both paused a moment, then laughed. Quietly, it was the kind of laugh you earn after too many years of paying attention to things no one else thought you'd notice. On Saturday, Maggie drove to a small garden center just outside town and picked out a teakwood bench. Simple, smooth, no frills. She loaded it into her trunk herself, drove it home, and spent the rest of the afternoon sanding, oiling, and sealing it. When she finished, she attached the small bronze plaque she'd had engraved earlier that week. Just 3 words: peace earned. She placed it in the far end of her backyard, beneath the dogwood tree that only ever bloomed for 2 weeks a year, but always did it like it mattered. That night, Nora came by with lemonade and peach cobbler that tasted like too much cinnamon, but still managed to be perfect. She spotted the bench right away. "Let me guess," she said, grinning. "Therapeutic landscaping?" "No," Maggie replied. "A milestone marker." They sat outside in the dusk light, sipping lemonade, the cicadas beginning to warm up for the evening like a low orchestra tuning their strings. Nora glanced at her sideways. "You know, maybe you should teach instead of write." "I already taught," Maggie said, leaning back. "I just didn't use a chalkboard." "Well," Nora said, raising her glass, "whatever it is you're doing now, it's working." Maggie raised hers too, then caught the faint glow of Ava's phone lighting up inside through the kitchen window. Another text, probably. Another little fire Jenna had tried to light in a house no longer made of kindling. Maggie didn't need to read it. Because history, when recorded with care, becomes flame-proof. The letter from Harlan arrived in a slim gray envelope with his firm's embossed seal. Inside were 3 copies of a single-page statement. each neatly clipped to a cover note that read, "For record only. Client requests acknowledgement of delivery, not discussion." Maggie read it once, standing at her kitchen counter, the morning light cutting across the page like a watermark. To whom it may concern, our client, Ms. Margaret Fairbanks, maintains her position that no contact, no revisions, and no mediation are authorized or welcome. All estate matters have been lawfully finalized, witnessed, and registered. Documentation of competency has been notarized and filed accordingly. This correspondence serves as her official and final statement. Signed, Harlan C. DeWitt, Esquire. Beneath that, a single postscript. All subsequent inquiries will be returned unopened. Maggie smiled faintly. It wasn't triumph she felt. More like relief with an edge of exhaustion. Like hearing the final hinge click shut on a door she'd spent half her life holding closed by hand. She folded one copy for her file and placed it in the safe beside the others. The second went to Lisa for reference. The third, she tucked into a plain manila envelope labeled After, and slid it between her journals on the Sauer bookshelf, a breadcrumb for whoever came after, should anyone ever try to rewrite this chapter. 2 days later, Harlan called. His tone was lighter than it had been in months. She got counsel, he said, briefly. Maggie didn't ask who. They sent a letter requesting a review of the estate, he continued. Claimed emotional duress and impaired judgment. Maggie stirred her coffee. And? I responded with notarized proof of your mental competency from Dr. Keller, along with every time-stamped revision, witness affidavit, and correspondence trail from the last 6 months. There was the sound of paper shuffling on his end, the faint rustle of bureaucracy folding in on itself. Her lawyer withdrew within 48 hours, Harlan said. No appeal, no follow-up. The case is closed, Maggie, permanently. Maggie took a slow sip before answering. That's the fastest I've ever seen a door close. Harlan chuckled. That's because it was locked before they knocked. She smiled, though he couldn't see it. You've earned your retainer for the decade. When they hung up, Maggie sat for a while at the kitchen table. The hum of the refrigerator, the only sound. The air felt different. Not lighter exactly, but stable. Settled. Like the center of something that had stopped spinning. Ava dropped by that evening after work, hair pulled into a messy bun, still in her campus sweatshirt. I heard, she said, flopping into a chair. Jenna's meltdown has gone quiet. Radio silence. It's not silence, Maggie said. It's retreat. Ava grinned. Retreat looks good on her. They shared Chinese takeout from paper boxes, eating over the sink like they used to when Ava was little and didn't want to bother with plates. There was something comforting about the casualness, the unremarkable rhythm of a life not under observation. After dinner, Maggie rinsed the dishes and pulled a black trash bag from the cupboard. What's that? Ava asked. Donations. For the shelter? Maggie nodded. Winter coats, mine, a few of hers. Ava's brows knit. You're donating Jenna's coats? Maggie tied the bag, neat and tight. In her name, quietly, they'll never know the difference. Ava shook her head, half smiling. You're something else, Maggie shrugged. It's what closure looks like when you've run out of anger. She carried the bag out to the porch. The air was crisp, the sky a deep navy washed with early stars. She set the donation bag beside the steps, ready for the morning pickup, and looked toward the street. No idling cars this time. No watchers. Just stillness. When she turned back toward the house, the reflection in the kitchen window caught her eye. Her own silhouette framed by the soft glow of the dining room light. For the first time in years, she looked like herself, uninterrupted. Inside, Ava was refilling her tea, humming something, faint and tuneless. The sound filled the air in an easy, unbroken loop. Maggie stepped in and closed the door behind her. Ava looked up. Done? Done. Ava smiled, soft but certain. So what now? Maggie thought for a moment, then reached for her notepad. The same one where she'd once written, documented history to begin. She flipped to the next blank page. Now, she said, pen poised, we start a different kind of record. The scent of garlic and thyme filled the kitchen by mid-afternoon, thick and warm, curling up into the corners of the ceiling like it had been invited. The windows fogged from the oven heat. A folding card table had been added to the end of the dining room setup, not because they needed more space, but because no one at this table would sit at the head. Maggie basted the roast, then turned toward the stove where Nora was elbow deep in mashed potatoes, muttering something about real butter or nothing. Ava was across the room by the spice rack, holding up a bottle of marjoram like it might detonate. "Smells like furniture polish," she declared. "It's supposed to," Maggie replied, grinning. "That means you're doing it right." The house buzzed gently. No chaos, no clatter, just quiet movement. People asking what needed to be done and actually waiting for the answer. Maggie's neighbor from 3 doors down brought cornbread. Nora brought a cranberry chutney that somehow outshined the store-bought version sitting untouched in the fridge. Ava made a pie from scratch, proudly announcing she didn't even use TikTok for help. Someone brought wine. No one brought drama. It was Maggie who made the stuffing. Her mother's recipe, the one she hadn't touched in at least a decade. Crumbled sausage. Celery so finely chopped it practically dissolved. Sage that clung to your clothes for hours after. She stirred it slowly in the biggest ceramic bowl she owned, her eyes glassy but not wet. "Smells like 1987 in here," Nora said softly as she passed behind her. "Don't jinx it," Maggie murmured, but her smile didn't falter. The table was set with mismatched plates and cloth napkins that had seen better decades. There were no place cards, no speech, no grand toasts. Just chairs pulled close and elbows brushing in the best way. They ate for a long time. No one rushed. Conversation floated, dipped, and curled around topics like old TV shows, bad landlords, funny stories about last-minute grocery store lines. Someone quoted a meme. Someone else pretended not to understand it. But no one mentioned Jenna. No one even brought up her name. It wasn't avoidance, it was irrelevance. Her absence didn't hang in the air. It had been cleared. After the dishes were rinsed and stacked, Maggie made tea. A sleepy chamomile blend in a heavy brown kettle, poured into old mismatched mugs she hadn't used in years. Everyone curled into armchairs and corners of the couch like they'd lived there forever. Ava reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of papers. "I brought some stuff from writing class, in case anyone's still awake." They were. Nora read a piece about dancing alone in her living room during a power outage. The neighbor read something about the first tomato from her garden. Ava read a half-poem, half-monologue titled "The Girl with 2 Homes and 1 Voice." No one said it, but everyone knew the second home was this one. Maggie didn't read anything aloud, but she listened with both hands wrapped around her mug, the steam painting soft ghosts on her glasses. And when the stories were done, and only the kettle hissed quietly from the stovetop, she stood and collected the mugs, one by one, without a word. The house was quiet by 10. Ava had gone upstairs to the guest room. Nora had walked home. The neighbors waved from the sidewalk, their laughter trailing down the street like ribbon. Maggie sat alone at the table now, her fingertips brushing over the wood grain like it could speak. A candle flickered low in the center, unscented, practical, the kind you burn all the way down. She let the silence settle, not fill, just settle. It was the kind of silence that didn't ask for anything back, the kind that only showed up once you'd earned it. She reached for her notepad, flipped to the page she'd left blank the night Harlan called, and wrote. The night no one looked over their shoulder, she paused, smiled, then kept writing. The envelope was pale blue, the kind used for thank you notes or wedding invitations. Maggie found it wedged between the electric bill and a grocery flyer, addressed in tidy block letters she didn't recognize. She opened it at the counter, slicing the flap with her fingernail. Dear Ms. Fairbanks, I received notice that I'm this year's recipient of the Renner Foundation scholarship you funded. I'm the first in my family to study nursing. My mother says I got your award because somebody believed women like her deserved better care. I wanted you to know I won't waste it. Thank you for helping me start something that matters. Lydia Morales, St. Catherine's College of Health Sciences. Maggie read it twice, the second time aloud, softly enough that only the hum of the refrigerator seemed to answer. Then she reached for the file cabinet in her office, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled a new folder from the stack. Across the tab she wrote in black ink, Legacy Reclaimed. She slipped the letter inside and closed the drawer. The sound it made, metal sliding against metal, felt final, but not heavy. Like punctuation, not closure. By late spring, her legal records were sealed, notarized, archived. Her calendar was full again, but every box was something she chose. Book club on Mondays, volunteer shift at the shelter on Thursdays, the new writing circle on Saturdays, where Ava sometimes tagged along. No court dates, no phone calls she didn't want to answer, no signatures that came with warning labels. She walked every morning now, 3 miles along the same route, past the bakery, the park, the intersection where the traffic light always blinked red even when no cars came. And once a week she took the longer loop that passed Jenna's street. She never looked in, not once. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, headphones in, the rhythm of her shoes against the pavement steady as breath. The house was still there, trim freshly painted, porch swing replaced, but whatever ghost lingered had stopped calling her by name. One afternoon, Nora met her at the cafe by the lake. The sunlight bounced off the water hard enough to make them both squint. "I saw her car," Nora said, stirring her coffee. "Parked outside that new yoga place. You walked right past, didn't you?" "Probably," Maggie said. "You didn't even glance?" "No." Nora smiled, shaking her head. "You didn't cut her out, you know." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "No?" She gave herself the scissors. Maggie laughed once, low, surprised, genuine. "That's cleaner than I would have said it." "You always did like clean," Nora teased. Maggie shrugged. "I like accurate." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching ducks scatter at the edge of the pier. A boy threw bits of pretzel into the water, his mother calling half-heartedly for him to stop. The air smelled like cinnamon and lakeweed, sweet and sharp all at once. "You doing anything for Thanksgiving this year?" Nora asked eventually. Maggie smiled, eyes on the horizon. "Hosting again, same as last year. Ava's bringing friends from campus. Everyone's got a seat." Nora tilted her head. "Still your favorite holiday?" "Always," Maggie said. "Just not with them." That night, Maggie sat at her desk. The lamp cast a small, perfect circle of light across the wood. Outside, the first cold wind of November rattled the shutters. She opened her notepad, the same one that began with documented history to begin, and flipped to a fresh page. For a long time, she didn't write. She just listened to the house breathe. Then the words came, steady as heartbeat. "At Thanksgiving, my daughter snapped. 'We already fed you once today.' So I starved her share out of my will, and I've been full ever since." She set the pen down, folded her hands, and read the lines once. No edits, no second-guessing. Just the truth, printed in her own handwriting, the story she'd refused to let anyone else tell. Maggie leaned back in her chair, eyes on the framed piece above her desk. Second servings aren't guaranteed. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen. The house, her house, waited, quiet, complete. And somewhere across town, unseen and unacknowledged, the echo of her silence carried farther than any shout ever could.